In this episode, we're going to be talking about boosting your podcast with a dedicated podcast website and how to get that to rank higher in the SEO. Stay tuned.
This is the Podcast in the Rough. Tune in every Friday for new adventurous episodes.
Welcome back to another episode of the Podcast in the Rough. I'm your host, Zebulon Thomas, and today, this is episode 142, and I've got an essential topic for all of you podcasters out there: creating a killer website for your podcast. Let's start with the basics. A podcast website is like your digital headquarters. It's a place where your audience can connect with you, find episodes, and learn more about the show. But what are the important elements to include in your podcast website? First off, make sure your website has a clear and easy-to-use navigation menu. List your episodes, provide an About You page, and don't forget to include links to your social media profiles. This makes it easier for your listeners to explore and engage with your content wherever you are posting it. Next, optimize your website for user experience. A clean and organized layout is key. Consider using a responsive design so that your site looks good on any device, be it desktop, tablet, or smartphone. I highly recommend when you build your website to build it mainly driven for how it looks on a mobile device. Now let's talk about SEO. Search engine optimization is critical for making your podcast discoverable online. Use relevant keywords in your episodes, titles, show notes, descriptions, and blog posts. This helps search engines understand what your podcast is about, boosting your chances of ranking higher in the search results. And speaking of SEO, one thing often overlooked is the importance of a privacy policy and disclaimer. While they may not directly impact SEO, they do build trust with your audience and protect you legally. So make sure you have these in place. Privacy policies reassure your listeners about how you handle their data, and disclaimers can safeguard you from any unintended consequences of your content. If you're operating without a privacy policy or disclaimers in place, you're really running risk of a lot of damage to your brand and legally to you. Now let's get into some strategies for maximizing your podcast website potential. A dedicated website allows you to create a deeper connection with your audience. Consider starting a blog related to your podcast niche, share behind-the-scenes content, or even host exclusive giveaways. Utilize your website to its fullest by incorporating call to actions. Encourage your visitors to subscribe, leave reviews, or join your mailing list. This not only boosts your engagement, but also helps you in growing your podcast community. And I've talked about this before, having a dedicated podcast website really makes it easier for someone who is not on the platform that you're asking them to subscribe to can find. So if I say, hey, subscribe to the podcast, on what? Am I giving the link to Apple Podcasts, Spotify? Where am I giving the link to? But if I have a dedicated website like I do, when they go to the site to subscribe, they can choose where they want to subscribe to you on: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so on. Give them those options. And now a quick promo I have for you that will help you even more. Okay, once again, if you would like to join me inside the Podcast Community Mastermind Facebook group, it is absolutely free. All you have to do is go to thepodcastintherough.com/learn. That is thepodcastintherough.com/learn, and get inside the group and learn how to podcast from start to success. I also want to say that I have a new platform that I'm going to be giving content out on, and it's coming, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I want to show you how you can get access to exclusive content, and I have some great content on there now, and there's a bunch coming out very soon, so I don't want you to miss this opportunity to get some exclusive content and truly take your podcast to the next level. And this is extra content that doesn't really fit within the podcast right here, so I wanted to expand on certain topics and share some more detailed information, so definitely check this out. If you'd like to support this podcast, buy me a coffee by heading over to buymeacoffee.com/intherough and become part of the adventure by showing your support and taking advantage of any one of our exciting membership tiers. The Podcast in the Rough. Now let's wrap up with a teaser from what's coming next. Season 5 of the Podcast in the Rough is just around the corner. Get ready, because in Season 5, I've packed it with expert advice and insights in various topics within my wheelhouse. I wanted to elaborate more on some of the details and the things that I've been involved in to really help companies grow, expand your knowledge, teach you some tech stuff, and also, more importantly, create the life that you want, the life that you want to design. And I'm going to share all of that in season 5, and I'm so excited to kick that off. And if you want to know the best way to support my podcast, listen to this right here. All right, if you're enjoying this podcast episode, I would love for you to give me a rating and review about this podcast by heading over to thepodcastintherough.com and scrolling to the bottom of the page and leaving us a review. Or if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a star rating and a review. It would help us reach more people and get them to learn about the Podcast in the Rough. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it. And before I sign off here, I want to remind you to check out our website at thepodcastintherough.com for all resources mentioned in today's episode. So thank you again for tuning in to episode 141 of the Podcast in the Rough. I'm Zebulon Thomas, and until next time, keep refining your podcasting craft. Take care. This is the Podcast in the Rough.